Last year, you finally did what every minimalist expert tells you to do. You opened your closet, filled donation bags, and got rid of everything that didn't seem essential. For a few weeks, it felt amazing. The space looked cleaner, your mind felt lighter, you were convinced you had discovered the secret to a simpler life. Then summer arrived, and you realized you had donated the only pair of shorts that actually fit. A few months later, the jacket you wore every autumn was gone too. By winter, you were spending money replacing things you already owned. That's when you started wondering whether the problem was really your clutter or the advice itself. Minimalism has helped millions of people reduce stress, save money, and become more intentional. But somewhere along the way, useful ideas turned into rigid rules. Rules that sound smart in theory but often fail in practice. And when those rules fail, people don't blame the rules. They blame themselves. The truth is that many popular minimalist principles were created by people living very specific lifestyles. Advice that works for a single remote worker in a mild climate doesn't automatically work for a parent raising children, commuting to work, and managing 4 distinct seasons every year. The problem isn't minimalism. The problem is treating personal preferences like universal laws. Today we're looking at 10 minimalist rules that consistently backfire and what works far better instead. Before we begin, subscribe to Fine & Coon. If you want practical insights about money, possessions, and building a life that actually works in the real world, you're in the right place. The first rule is probably the most repeated minimalist advice ever created. If you haven't used it in 6 months, get rid of it. The logic sounds reasonable until you realize how many useful possessions naturally go unused for longer than 6 months. Seasonal clothing immediately breaks this rule. You don't wear a winter coat during summer. You don't use a swimsuit during winter. The fact that an item hasn't been used recently doesn't automatically mean it has lost its purpose. The same applies to formal clothing, holiday decorations, camping equipment, and emergency supplies. These items may spend months sitting untouched, but when the moment arrives, they're suddenly essential. The real cost appears when people donate useful items and later discover they still need them. Instead of pulling the item from storage, they pull out a credit card and buy another one. Minimalism should reduce waste, not create expensive rebuying cycles. A better question is simple. When am I realistically going to need this again? If the answer is clear and replacement would be expensive, keeping it may be the smarter decision. The second rule claims your wardrobe should contain a specific number of items. Depending on who you ask, that number might be 25, 33, or something equally precise. The problem is that these numbers are completely arbitrary. Different lives require different clothing. Someone living near the beach has different needs than someone dealing with snow, rain, professional dress codes, and outdoor activities. One number cannot possibly fit everyone. A nurse doesn't need the same wardrobe as an accountant. A frequent traveler doesn't need the same wardrobe as someone who rarely leaves home. Life circumstances matter far more than arbitrary limits. Ironically, reducing clothing too aggressively can make life harder rather than easier. A wardrobe that constantly creates inconvenience isn't minimalist, it's restrictive. Instead of chasing a number, focus on function. Keep clothes that fit well, serve real purposes, and make your life easier. That's the point of simplicity. The third rule sounds almost unquestionable. Buy experiences instead of things. On the surface, it feels like great advice. Experiences create memories. Possessions create clutter. But the reality is far more complicated because many of the best experiences in life depend on possessions. A bicycle creates opportunities for adventure. A kayak creates opportunities to explore the water. A camera helps capture meaningful moments. A musical instrument creates opportunities for creativity and self-expression. The possession isn't competing with the experience, it's making the experience possible. The same is true for hobbies. Gardening requires tools, painting requires supplies, woodworking requires equipment, sports require gear. Telling people to stop buying things and start buying experiences ignores the fact that many experiences begin with things. Some possessions also provide value every single day. A comfortable chair, a quality mattress, a reliable kitchen knife. These aren't one-time purchases. They're ongoing experiences that improve life for years. Instead of asking whether something is a thing or an experience, ask a better question. How much value will this create over time? The answer is often far more useful than the category itself. The fourth rule is one in, one out. Buy something new and something old must leave. As a reminder against mindless accumulation, it's helpful. As a rigid law, it often makes no sense. Life changes. Families grow. Careers evolve. New hobbies appear. Sometimes you genuinely need more of something than you did before. Not every addition requires a subtraction. The problem begins when people throw away useful possessions simply because they feel obligated to maintain mathematical balance. The rule becomes more important than reality. Imagine buying a high-quality pan that improves your cooking. Should a perfectly useful item leave simply because something new arrived? Not necessarily. Good decisions don't always fit neat formulas. Use one in, one out as a checkpoint rather than a commandment. Before acquiring something new, ask whether it deserves space in your life. But don't force unnecessary removals just to satisfy a rule. The fifth rule became famous around the world because it feels emotionally satisfying. Keep only what sparks joy. The idea has value, but it breaks down when joy becomes the only measurement that matters. Many important possessions don't spark joy at all. Your fire extinguisher doesn't spark joy. Your tax documents don't spark joy. Your plunger doesn't spark joy. Yet getting rid of them would be absurd. These possessions exist because they solve problems. Their purpose isn't excitement. Their purpose is usefulness. A functional life requires both. The joy test also struggles with new possessions. A book you haven't read yet doesn't create the same emotional response as a favorite book you've loved for years. A new tool hasn't earned your appreciation yet. A better framework combines emotion and practicality. Does this item bring joy? Is it useful? Is it necessary? Does it support activities I care about? The more complete the evaluation, the better the decision. The sixth rule is responsible for countless regrets. Declutter everything in one massive weekend. Empty the closets, fill donation bags, transform your entire home in a couple of days. It sounds exciting because dramatic transformations make great content. Before and after photos look impressive. Videos showing huge piles of discarded items generate millions of views. But real life doesn't work like social media. Large decluttering sessions encourage rushed decisions. Instead of carefully evaluating possessions, people become focused on momentum. The goal shifts from making smart choices to getting rid of as much as possible. That's why major purges often lead to rebuying. Useful possessions get caught in the excitement of the moment. Months later, people realize they still need them and spend money replacing things they already owned. Small, consistent decluttering sessions work much better. 15 minutes each week produces fewer mistakes than an exhausting all-day purge. Slow decisions tend to be better decisions. The seventh rule has less to do with ownership and more to do with appearance. Minimalism has become strongly associated with white walls, neutral colors, empty surfaces, and carefully arranged furniture. After spending enough time online, many people start believing that minimalism is an aesthetic rather than a lifestyle. They focus on creating a certain look instead of solving real problems. The problem is that aesthetic minimalism and practical minimalism are completely different things. You can own very little and still have a colorful, vibrant home full of personality. You can also own far too much while maintaining a minimalist appearance. Even worse, maintaining the minimalist aesthetic often requires extra effort. White furniture shows stains. Empty surfaces require constant maintenance. Perfection becomes another responsibility. Your home doesn't need to impress strangers. It needs to support your life. Comfort, function, and personality matter far more than whether your living room looks like an interior design magazine. The 8th rule says minimalists should never buy anything on sale. The reasoning is understandable. Discounts encourage impulse purchases and create artificial urgency. But avoiding every sale is simply paying more than necessary. If you already need running shoes and find a quality pair at a significant discount, buying them isn't a failure. It's smart shopping. The same applies to household essentials and planned purchases. The real danger isn't sales. The real danger is allowing sales to create needs that didn't exist before. That's where people get into trouble. Before buying anything discounted, ask yourself one question. If this item were full price, would I still want it when I genuinely needed it? If the answer is yes, the discount is simply a bonus. Minimalism should help you spend more intentionally, not force you to ignore opportunities that save money. The 9th rule romanticizes extreme portability. According to some minimalist philosophies, success means being able to pack your entire life into a few boxes, a few suitcases, or even a single backpack. The ability to move quickly is presented as the ultimate form of freedom. For a small group of people, that lifestyle makes sense. Frequent travelers, digital nomads, and people expecting major relocations may genuinely benefit from owning less. But most people aren't preparing to move every few months. Most people are building careers, relationships, families, and communities. They are creating homes they intend to enjoy for years. For them, optimizing everything around a hypothetical future move often creates unnecessary sacrifices in the present. Comfortable furniture improves daily life. Quality kitchen equipment makes cooking easier. Personal decorations create warmth and familiarity. These things provide value every day, not just during the rare occasion of moving. Stability has value. Roots have value. Building a home that supports your lifestyle is not a failure of minimalism. In many ways, it's one of the reasons people pursue simplicity in the first place. The goal isn't to be ready to leave at any moment. The goal is to live well where you are. The 10th and most damaging rule is the belief that minimalism means owning as little as possible. This misunderstanding sits underneath many of the other rules and turns a useful philosophy into a competition. Once minimalism becomes a numbers game, people stop asking whether their possessions improve their lives. Instead, they start asking whether they can survive with even less. Ownership becomes something to feel guilty about rather than something to evaluate thoughtfully. Ironically, this creates the exact stress minimalism was supposed to eliminate. Instead of feeling free, people become obsessed with counting, reducing, and constantly questioning every item they own. The pursuit of simplicity becomes another source of pressure. The original purpose of minimalism was never deprivation. It was never about proving how little you could live with. It was about removing unnecessary burdens so that what remained could serve you better. Different lives require different resources. A photographer needs equipment. A musician needs instruments. A gardener needs tools. Parents need things that single adults may never require. None of these people are failing at minimalism. They're simply living different lives. The better question isn't, how little can I own? The better question is, do I have what I need without being overwhelmed by excess? That shift changes everything. This is why I prefer thinking about minimalism through the idea of sufficiency rather than scarcity. Not as little as possible, just enough. Enough clothing to support your lifestyle. Enough tools to support your responsibilities, enough comfort to enjoy your home, enough preparedness to handle life's surprises. When you focus on sufficiency, minimalism becomes flexible. It adapts to your circumstances instead of forcing your circumstances to adapt to a rigid ideology. And that's exactly how it should work. If you look closely, all 10 of these rules fail for the same reason. They prioritize ideology over practicality. They assume every person has the same needs, the same goals, the same climate, and the same responsibilities. Real life is far more complicated than that. Effective minimalism isn't about memorizing rules. It's about developing judgment. It's about learning how to distinguish between possessions that genuinely improve your life and possessions that merely consume space, money, and attention. That judgment comes from asking better questions. Does this item serve a purpose? Does it add value? Would I miss it if it disappeared? Am I keeping it because it's useful or because I feel guilty getting rid of it? Those questions are far more powerful than any arbitrary formula. What actually works is continuous, thoughtful curation. Small adjustments instead of dramatic interventions. Regular evaluation instead of massive purges. Flexible systems instead of rigid rules. Over time, these habits create a home that evolves naturally alongside your life. What's interesting is how closely this mindset connects to personal finance. The way you manage possessions and the way you manage money are deeply related. Both require distinguishing genuine needs from manufactured wants. Both require resisting pressure from marketing, trends, and social expectations. The person who understands value tends to make better decisions in both areas. They don't buy things simply because they're discounted. They don't throw things away simply because a trend tells them to. They evaluate decisions based on long-term usefulness rather than short-term emotion. They understand that every possession has a cost beyond its purchase price. Storage costs, maintenance costs, replacement costs, mental costs. At the same time, they recognize that useful possessions create value through convenience, comfort, productivity, and enjoyment. This is why financial literacy isn't just about budgets and investments. It's about learning how to think clearly in a world constantly trying to influence your decisions. The more intentional you become with your money, the more intentional you often become with your possessions. And the opposite is true as well. Learning to evaluate what deserves space in your home often teaches you what deserves space in your budget. The same principles apply to both. If today's video helped you recognize minimalist rules that have been working against you, remember this: the problem was never that you weren't disciplined enough. In many cases, the problem was that you were following rules designed for someone else's life. You don't need permission to keep useful possessions. You don't need permission to own equipment related to hobbies you love. You don't need permission to build a home that reflects your personality and supports your daily reality. Minimalism should make life easier, not harder. It should reduce stress, not create it. It should help you focus on what matters instead of forcing you into unnecessary sacrifices that make everyday life more complicated. Keep what serves you. Remove what doesn't. Reevaluate as your circumstances change. That's the principle hiding underneath all the noise, all the trends, and all the rules. Because in the end, the goal was never owning more, and it was never owning less. The goal was always living better. The people who understand that aren't trying to win a minimalist competition. They're simply building lives that work. So the next time someone tells you there's a magic number of possessions, a perfect timeline for decluttering, or a universal rule that everyone should follow, remember this: good decisions depend on context. Your life is unique, and the systems you use should reflect that reality. Take what works, ignore what doesn't, keep the intentionality, keep the thoughtfulness, and leave behind the rules that create more problems than they solve. Your possessions should serve your life. Any version of minimalism that forgets that simple truth has already lost sight of the point.